Hello and welcome to the Distance podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke discuss othering, the psychological phenomenon that leads people to make necessary but sometimes dangerously misleading categorizations of other people into outgroups, sometimes responsible for one sort of nefarious behavior or another. All right, so we're going to have a bit of an interesting one today. Usually we have a guest or we have a specific paper that we analyze and we talk about the implications that it has for cancel culture or for liberalism more broadly. Today's going to be a bit different. I think one of the messages that really sticks, I don't know, hopefully runs through everything that we do, is that the kind of psychological features, because they're not necessarily bugs, right? You know, the causes of cancel culture are psychological features that sometimes manifest in very positive ways. In fact, more often than not, manifest in positive ways. Otherwise, they wouldn't have evolved into the human condition, but as we can see, have gone awry in some cases. We are victim to them as well, right?
Right.
So,
exactly.
And in particular, we're very good at seeing the problems in other people, in people who we would regard as being on an opposing team, for example. And we're much, much, much worse, for obvious reasons, at seeing problems not only within ourselves, but also those who we would regard, and perhaps with very good reason, we would be right to regard as being on our team. And Elizabeth and I thought that we would dedicate this episode into looking at a problem with some people who we would generally regard as being on our team. And in particular, Elizabeth, feel free to step in here. A particular kind of conspiratorial thinking
about the other, right?
About the other, right?
About the other, yeah.
So before we go, okay, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was just reading a paper this week about something called self-signaling, which talks about, which is relevant to what you were just saying, that this person has a theory that they were testing in various ways, that we actually have evolved to trick ourselves, to not really be aware. You know, we talk about thinking fast and thinking slow, right? Or, you know, so that we've evolved in some ways so that those two systems don't always talk to each other, because we would actually, if we were aware of all the times that we were fooling ourselves into maybe thinking that we were more moral or more righteous, or just, you know, some of, you know, anything, that we were more correct about something. If we were aware that we were tricking ourselves, then we would not be very good at convincing other people. Mm-hmm. And that is key to survival. So convincing other people, getting other people maybe to come over to our side or to help us with a problem or something like that. So if we were conspiratorial and aware all the time that we were being conspiratorial, then we would in fact lose our ability to, you know, to interact with other people in a convincing way. So it's kind of interesting that, you know, that we would evolve to be that, to sometimes be that unaware. So we're signaling ourselves that we know what we're talking about, that we're being honest and truthful, while at the same time, you know, not so much.
So somewhat alarmingly, lacking nuance in conversation has an adaptive quality.
Right, exactly. Yes. And so, you know, again, we wouldn't be all the time or, anything, but that sometimes it would be advantageous. And, some of the examples they were using was, say, for example, this is a really simple example, but say, for example, you're trying to lose weight. And so you want, it's better. Let's face it, like if we do a good job, on our diet today, how much impact is that really going to have? Like one day of doing a good job on our diet or our exercise or the combination, right? So we actually have to we have to remain blissfully unaware of how little it matters moment to moment or day to day, or maybe even almost week to week, right? How much progress we make towards certain goals. Because like if we're trying to, abstain from alcohol, if we wait one more day to do abstinence, is it really going to matter? If we don't, again, if we go off our diet this one time, is that really going to matter in the long term? So it's better than to be able to fool ourselves into thinking that what we do today really made a difference. So that was an example that they used of when it would be good to self-signal that we're making progress towards a goal when in fact we're not.
Yeah,
And then there were interpersonal examples too, but
I can give an example from my own life about, for example, one time that I was accused of homophobia. And this was by a very intelligent person who is well read. One of those, an intelligent idiot, somebody who's well read, but their brain is just completely tribally obsessed, and so they're just justifying every single tribal decision. Anyway, so do you remember the story about the couple who were prosecuted because they wouldn't bake a cake for a gay couple? The gay bakery
well, they
thing?
weren't prosecuted. They were sued in civil court. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. In
Yeah.
civil court.
Yeah.
Anyway, basically, we got into this conversation, and my point was, I thought that and this is the point that I made. I said, look, I'm very much against a bakery not making a cake for gay people. But it doesn't follow that I think it should be illegal, because that would have all kinds of ramifications across the board. This otherwise intelligent person didn't get that, got up and walked away, and then told everybody that I was a homophobe, right? Because they couldn't listen. So even when you're talking to intelligent people, emotion can just get in the way of them even listening, let alone considering a nuanced argument that if they had have sat down to think about it, they might actually end up agreeing with. And
well,
so
I
in
have
cases like that, you
difficulty.
shouldn't. Yeah, go on.
I have my own sort of, I call this a hypocrisy in my own life. This is one that I am aware of. I'm aware of other hypocrisies in my in my own thinking, which is that I believe in a woman's right to choose. And then I also realized one day that I believe if someone killed a pregnant woman in say a car accident, that two people were killed. So the pregnant woman and the fetus were both killed. That's two people, right? And I realized this. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm in a real quandary here. Now, look, I have not tried to. I've thought a lot about that in the last say 20 years. Actually, I've thought a lot about that when I realized that I can't seem I can't seem to fix that in my mind. Okay. And I think I've just sort of come to be okay with that, this quandary. And I think generally speaking, most of us are uncomfortable with those kinds of things, and we want to, hurry up and pick a side, or even not hurry up and pick a side, right?
Yeah. And it's very difficult to become comfortable with the fact that some of these things have no solution, and both options, if you like, and there are often more than two, but let's just keep this simple, both options would have awful consequences. A classic example is hashtag believe all women, right? So rape and sexual assault by their very nature, generally happen when there aren't witnesses there to put a stop to it or to report it, or for it to meet the kind of standards of evidence that would be needed to prosecute somebody beyond a reasonable doubt. Because it happens usually behind closed doors or in a park at nighttime or something like that, right? And so therefore, the temptation would be to say, well, let's believe all women, because lots of women, probably the majority of rapes happen in a way that we can't establish that proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And so if we accept that, then the advantage we gain is we can go after sexual predators who deserve to be put in prison. But what's the problem? The problem is that not all women are nice people, and some women will make up sexual assault allegations against perfectly innocent people who will also go to prison and have their lives destroyed. So it's not necessarily a problem that you can solve. You know, if we don't lower the standards of evidence, that puts women at danger, perfectly innocent women at danger. If we do, that also puts innocent men at danger. So how do we solve this problem?
And we've talked a lot about on this podcast, but and also just in other conversations about things like we've talked about, obviously we had Pam on, and we talked about book banning, and we've talked about story hours, and we get drag queen story hours, and again, a lot of whole think it's like we have to throw out everything, right? So if there's the potential for maybe a bad actor at the top, then everything that comes down is bad. If there's a potential for a bad actor, somewhere, at ground level, then also everything is bad and must all be thrown out. As part of the Institute for Liberal Values, these are some of the things that we talk a lot about. And, it's, where do we draw lines, and do we draw any lines? Do they have is there a fence around our playground? Are there lines that we won't cross? Are there movements or groups that that we're going to label as off limits or bad? And we try really hard to remind ourselves that just because there's maybe a single person, or as you say, a single psychological construct or something that might weigh in, that might contribute to some of this, doesn't mean that psychological construct is bad. Doesn't mean that that a person is all bad. I really think, I mentioned this several times, I really think that to a large extent, the people who canceled me, and probably they canceled, that canceled you, did what they did to start with because they wanted to participate in the contemporary social narrative. It was an opportunity, right? The opportunity arose for them to signal their virtuousness, their anti-racism, their whatever. And, and now it's kind of captured them, and there's no way out, really. They're in, and I'm a them, and they're the, to them, I'm the they, right? I'm the bad one, and they're the in group, and I'm the out group.
So there's a huge irony here, isn't there? Right. So we could make the argument for them, right? The way that racism would generally present itself is that, I don't know, let's say a Chinese person, a person of Chinese ethnicity, attacked my friend for no reason, just in the street, attacked them. Therefore, it's reasonable to conclude that Chinese person is probably a pretty bad person. Well, that person of Chinese extraction is probably a pretty bad person. That's not unreasonable. That's perfectly fine. But then it's the next step, isn't it? And this is where racism comes from, right? It's that when you extrapolate from the actions of a few, let's say bad people. So let's say I extrapolate from the actions of the Communist Party of China, which are awful, and genuinely awful, and a genuinely unitary political entity that is capable of making decisions and enforcing them throughout its power, its hierarchies. that I conclude from that basis that all Chinese people are bad people, or that they're all tarred by the actions of the Communist Party of China. And that becomes the leap too far, right? That becomes one of, and this is where the kind of anti-racist people will be absolutely correct. Of course, you can't conclude from the actions of a few bad people that the whole Chinese ethnicity is similarly compromised. That would be ridiculous. And this is obvious, right? This is obvious to me. This is obvious to you. This is obvious to a conservative, to somebody who would call himself a liberal, a Marxist, you know, a wokey, would all be fully in agreement on that point. And yet they do it, right? They participate in exactly the same thing.
Yes.
And we do too.
Yes. And we are, you know, we fall into this and we try to catch ourselves, but you know, again, there's this level of awareness, you know, that's required, and to be constantly monitoring our external world and our internal world is, I mean, it's a very cognitively demanding task. And categorization is, you know, it's just natural, you know, it's a natural cognitive process that's happening in order to organize our world. I go for a walk and I'm trying to decide if, you know, is this car, let's say I'm going to cross the street, is this car going to stop or not, right? Is this, you know, good for me, bad for me? I mean, just these tiny little things all the time. It doesn't mean the driver is a bad person, you know, because I'm not sure if they're going to stop or not. So not all, you know, not all drivers are bad just because somebody, drives my, you know, doesn't stop for me at a crosswalk. But I might say something like, you know, I'm in a little beach community and it's like, oh, you know, damn summer people, you know, they don't stop for anybody. They're just in their own, you know, in their own world or whatever. And I think that we hear, I think maybe you and I are hearing this more because we're spending so much time. One of the reasons we're doing this is because we don't get to do this anywhere else anymore, right? So we talk to each other about art research and about human nature and that kind of thing. And maybe we're becoming more aware of it and more aware of it in ourselves and more aware of it in other people because we are, you know, focusing on it so much, you know, just between the two of us and talking on this podcast. And so we see it and we try to maybe look into some things that we don't know a lot about, that people maybe make broad sweeping
statements
about. Yes. And one of the things, again, that's come up have been things like, you know, school, you know, teach things that are taught in schools, book banning, drag queen story hour, some of those kinds of things have come up on multiple occasions and are very, again, you know, contemporary problems we have here in the States. You know, we have, you know, Florida and Texas particularly making rules about what can be taught, you know, what can't be taught. So they're basically focused on what can't be taught. When then we have other states that are making rules about what must be taught. And those are oftentimes the same things. So you can't teach critical race theory-ish kinds of things. I don't think anybody's teaching nobody's actually teaching critical race theory at the grade school level, but maybe critical race theory influenced kinds of things. I mean, it's a legal theory, right? It's not being taught at the...
It started off, okay, so critical race theory starts off Derek Bell as a legal theory. I would be comfortable in saying that a very dumbed down version of critical race theory is being taught in schools. And the reason I'd be comfortable saying that is not because I think that version of critical race theory is, you know, representative of the best and most nuanced critical race theory scholarship, which I have a problem with. I have a problem with the best stuff as well, by the way, for anyone who's listening. But it's not necessarily representative of that stuff, but if you go on Amazon, you type in critical race theory for education, you'll find
yes.
whole lists of books, people advocating for critical race theory in education. And it was called critical race theory in education right up until the point that critical race theory became a dirty word.
Right.
And then they said, no,
It's
it's
a
not
little
really critical
shift.
race theory. That's
Yeah.
only something that's taught in college. And I kind of, in a way, they're right, because, if I was an advocate for critical race theory, I'd be kind of annoyed with the really dumbed down version of stuff that's being taught in schools. But at the same time, the people who got annoyed with the dumbed down version of stuff that's being taught in schools and then saying it's not critical race theory, they only started to complain when the right, for lack of a better descriptor, because I don't want to go, again, outgrouping, but people who would be commonly associated with the right started pointing out the problems with this dumbed down stuff, and were right to point out the problems with this dumbed down stuff. Because before that point, a lot of the, let's say the most famous critical race theory scholars, the most classic example would be Kimberly Crenshaw, was quite happy to proudly announce that, critical race theory started as a legal theory, but now it's in education, and isn't that a wonderful thing? So they kind of want to have their cake and eat it. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's, I mean, having your cake and eat. I mean, this is exactly, so what I find so fascinating is that the people who are saying this can't be taught in school, and the people who are saying that this must be taught in school, are pointing at each other, saying like they're the bad ones, right? So they are either, maybe they're indoctrinating our kids, maybe they're, trying to convert them in some way, maybe that's what Floridians might say, that, they are trying to, corrupt our kids. And then places like where I am, in a more progressive state, are pointing at at some of the other states and saying they are trying to either hide racism, or actually are trying to in a weird kind of way promote racism, to perpetuate it. And so we get all this othering, all this they, and they're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
They're doing
this endless cycle of dehumanization. And here's the point. They're not wrong, by the way, right? There are people who are trying to indoctrinate kids, and it's completely unacceptable. But what it doesn't, again, here's the mistake. So let's say, we talked about the Chinese person, the mistake with Chinese people, right? So we cannot conclude that from the actions of the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, that all Chinese people are evil, right? I can give you specific examples of scholars who would be in education, who would be associated with critical race theory practices, who probably would have identified as critical race theory advocates until it became a dirty word, who are openly for indoctrination. Like Barbara Applebaum would be the most obvious example.
Okay.
I think the name of her book is, off the top of my head, Being Good, Being White, and I think that's the name of her book. I might have to check. There's a lot of books on critical race theory that I've read, and they will get confused. Anyway, in the book that she wrote, she quite openly says, look, if you disagree with me, but your disagreement is because you don't understand something and you want to ask something and need clarification, that's okay. But if you disagree with my view on America or whatever being completely dominated by systemic racism and everything, that's not okay, because by disagreeing with me, you're creating harm. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's indoctrination. So, and I've seen this in education. I've seen, educators do this. I have seen educators fail students because not because their argument was terrible or because they didn't do their referencing correctly or whatever, but because they didn't go specifically along with the educator's narrow ideological purview. I've seen that happen. And again, I gave you an example of a book where basically the quite an influential academic, actually argues to do exactly that, pretty much. So the indoctrination is real. I'm not saying that it isn't. But again, what you can't do, or what you shouldn't do, is feel comfortable by saying, okay, I've got this example of, let's say, Barbara Applebaum. Therefore, every single person who is associated with critical race theory or thinks that critical race theory is a good thing will agree with Barbara Applebaum on that point.
Right.
It's like will behave accordingly. Yeah. It just does not follow. It's a huge non sequitur.
It is the mirror image of saying that because there are racist white people, that all white people are racist.
Exactly.
Because there are, bad actors or people with nefarious, goals doing drag queen story hour. Therefore, therefore there's a queer conspiracy to convert all children to, queerness or whatever. This is
because there are some very wealthy Jewish bankers who have questionable morals, which is true. Therefore, I'm sure it's, I don't know any, but I'm sure it is true. Therefore, there is a Jewish conspiracy to put Jewish people in positions of power over the whole world, right, which then leads to the Holocaust and the rise of fascism, right? Okay. And another one, because there are some rich people in the Tsardom of Russia who are of dubious morals and are behaving in a very, very bad way, of which I am utterly convinced there were plenty. Therefore, every business owner in Russia is part of the conspiracy to oppress the masses and needs to be either killed or sent to freeze to death in Siberia, some horrible gulag in Siberia. Is another version of this. What would we call it? It's certainly a fallacy, but it's almost worse than that. It's almost a kind of trap of thinking, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do think, like I said, I think it's a natural thing that we're categorizing, and it's so easy. It's like we just want to dispense with the hard thinking and just make it's just so black and white. It's very, I think this is one of the reasons why people make the religion analogy, because there are firm rules in religion, and that's very comforting, and it removes some tough decisions from our daily lives. So, there's the 10 Commandments, for example, or other kinds of rules set forth by a religion. And I think that that's why some people have made that religion connection, because if we make the rule that all white people are racist or all gay people are trying to corrupt our children, then it's just easy. Then it's, I know how to treat people. I know who I am. I know who they are. And I'm kind of done.
Yeah, but let's be fair. What these people are generally not saying is they're generally, so the people that we're looking at. So what we're kind of focusing on today, and it's just an example of all of these. It's the same mistake, right? It's the same mistake that leads to racism against black people. It's the same mistake that leads to wokies saying that all white people are racist. It's exactly the same mistake, right? The articulation that we thought we'd focus on today, again, because our team, people who we like, people who we admire, people who can be absolutely on point on loads of things, good people, intelligent people, are making this mistake. So the thing that we're focusing on is the queer issue, right? Is this notion that there is a conspiracy in school being advocated for. Now, I don't think they would say gay people. I don't even think they would say that it's transgender people in general that are doing this. There may be a few losers who would argue that, but who cares about them? What they would say, let's give the sophisticated version of the argument, right? What they would argue is that they would argue that things like drag queen story hour, that drag is always sexualized, and that it is not an attempt to normalize drag people, or to trans people, because drag and trans are not the same thing. It is not although they are presented as the same thing, they're not. That it is an attempt to normalize transgenderism, or it is an attempt to inculcate homosexuality in children.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say, look, maybe some of the people who are doing the drag queen story hour are not aware of that, but this is the specific ideological ends that they are being put used to achieving. And again, let's give the devil his due. I have seen clear evidence of horrible people doing horrible things during drag queen story hour in front of children that are totally despicable, and I agree, that's what those individuals are trying to do. But can we get from point A, I have observed a set of people involved in drag queen story hour trying to groom children into homosexuality, can we get from point A to point B? Therefore, it is reasonable to conclude that most, if not all, people who participate in Drag Queen Story Hour are trying to achieve the same thing.
Or that there's some kind of national or international group that is trying to force this, or trying to, put it into a curriculum that would be, spread. I just don't think that, and again,
well, I've seen no evidence of that.
Maybe even at a national or international level, there might be one or two of these people that you're talking about, right?
Right.
There could be some bad actors, because guess what? There's bad actors everywhere. There's bad actor, used car salesman, and then there's a few good ones. Might be a little
bad actors, by the way. Sometimes,
yeah, might
sometimes.
be bad. Yeah,
no, but we are right.
No, well. Exactly. No, that's not like.
A bad actor is not. This is when nuance is so important, because at times we're bad actors, right?
Right.
So, for example, Elizabeth, you gave me an example where you said, you just said that driver was awful and typically indicative of summer people creating an outgroup.
Yeah.
You have no idea. That person could have two screaming kids in the car.
Yes.
Could be trying to take their pregnant wife to hospital.
Right.
And have every reason to go across. And if you were to know the ins and outs of their situation, you'd be, no, absolutely, go straight ahead. Of course, why wouldn't you? And so that's an example of you being a bad actor, potentially, and me too. So we're all bad actors,
Sometimes
when we're in a bad mood, for example.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
bad. Like even the best parents are bad parents on occasionally.
Yeah, I mean, a classic example, right, with one of my kids, Nintendo Switch. I put it in a bag, and I thought that he had put it in his bag, and I got really angry with him and told him off, and it was completely my fault.
Yeah,
completely my fault.
Yeah. Most of the time, it probably is their fault.
Most of the time, yeah. But let's again, giving the devil his due. Are there seriously nefarious actors on the world stage? You'd think there'd have to be some. I mean, forget about Drag Queen Story Hour. I mean, we've got Xi Jinping, for example, who is a fairly nefarious actor on the world stage and has lots of power. So if it's possible for somebody like him, who would be way more evil than somebody grooming kids, I mean, that's bad, but Xi Jinping is presiding over a genocide right now. Then are there powerful people who are doing this kind of nefarious thing? And yes, I think that there almost certainly are. But does it follow that there is some kind of massive international conspiracy theory?
Yeah, it's a little harder to get there, isn't it? That there are few bad actors at all levels. The idea that you could get enough people together, enough of those bad actors coordinated well enough to create some kind of international conspiracy or educational program that could be that millions of teachers could be convinced, to use as, as if they're just like sort of zombies. Now let me just say that as a college professor in a program that has a lot of students who say that, they're in a teacher program. I will say this. I mean, I don't want to give, do not want to give today's teachers too much credit, because honestly, here's what I hear. I'll say, like, why is your second major psychology? So you're getting a major, a degree in education. They have to pick a second major. Why are you picking psychology? Why aren't you picking math, science, English, history, philosophy? Why? Because I'm bad at that. I'm not good at writing papers. I'm bad at math. I don't get science. So, okay, those are the people that are going to be teaching our children. Okay. So I do believe that there is a level of, of incompetence that is possible. Okay. For some people, again, not all teachers, but that there are some teachers that essentially are just babysitters looking for kind of activities to do that don't have math, science, reading. They don't have to grade. They don't have to create a test or grade a test or whatever. So they can do some kind of experiential activity, some kind of thing, maybe related to race, right? That doesn't really need to be, that doesn't require a lot of grading. It's like, the kids are going to have fun doing it. It's almost like a field trip in the classroom. So do I think that kind of thing happens? Sure. I think there's some like stupid stuff that teachers are doing in classrooms for sometimes good reasons, sometimes reasons that are nothing more than just teacher laziness, right? But sometimes they probably they think that they're doing the right thing, but again, do I believe that this is that they are engaged in part of a conspiracy to, convert children into some sort of, I don't know. I just don't.
So lazy. Well, let's. I can add something to this. Okay, as an academic formerly of education, I guess it's still one of the fields I'm half a foot in.
Yeah.
Half a foot in. I don't know. I did publish something last year, but it was crap. You know what these academic papers are like. You just end up writing crap, just full of jargon and nonsense because you've got co-authors and stuff, and it's like I can't be asked to like chew you up over all of your jargon, so let's just let it go. Anyway, so you're talking about, are there teachers who are incompetent and lazy and therefore are doing crap in the classroom? Completely right, there are. But there's also a third category of person who is not satisfied with being a teacher, who doesn't view educate, and this is probably the crucial factor that would lead it to look like there's a conspiracy, right?
Okay.
They believe themselves to be transformative intellectuals, right? So their job, and this is like the whole point of critical pedagogy, which draws upon critical theory, of which critical race theory is an offshoot, but it doesn't come from critical race theory originally. It comes from critical pedagogy, and then it kind of marries with critical race theory later on. But you get there without critical race theories. You don't need that, even though it's from the same family of ideas, if you know what I mean. Like different virus strains, right? They come from, and they kind of meet up later on. So critical pedagogy, the most important guy for this is Paulo Freire. The most important book is Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And again, let's give Freire his due. He was talking about educating people in Latin America where there are huge inequalities, and perhaps it might be a good thing to get people wise to the kind of inequalities that they're facing and try and do something about it. And yes, the Soviet Union and Marxism might be a horrible kind of empire, but it doesn't mean that you can't do something decent with Marxism, because Marxism, surprise, surprise, did diagnose at least some of the correct problems, even if it led to horrible, bloodthirsty regimes later on. Again, I'm really trying my best not to outgroup anybody here. And so what they would do, drawing upon this kind of critical pedagogy, is they would see themselves as teachers not there. I'm not here to teach English. I'm not here to teach mathematics. I mean, that's my secondary role, if you like. My primary role as a teacher is to inculcate critical thinking, and the most important thinker on this is a guy called Richard Paul, who is the head of he died recently, the head of the American Foundation for Critical Thinking, I think is their name. And he would say that critical thinking in the weak sense is what most people think critical thinking is, right? So being aware of psychological biases, knowing what a logical fallacy is, being able to put together coherent logical arguments, being able to see problems in the world, right? He would say, yeah, that's great, that's important, but that's critical thinking in the weak sense. But critical thinking in the strong sense is critical consciousness, which is a post-Marxist kind of critical theory term, which means basically becoming aware of how you are being oppressed in a society and emancipating yourself from it. And so these teachers see that as their primary role. And of course, why wouldn't they? Because that gives them meaning, right? That makes them feel that they're important.
Yeah, because look, teachers aren't making a lot of money, right?
No.
And I think that a lot of times what people assume is that, well, you're not even in it for the money. You're in it because for those reasons that you just mentioned.
Right.
You're in it because it gives your life meaning, because you love the kids. And there's some truth to that. There is some truth to that. And so if you feed into that in teachers, you can see how it would sort of, some of them would catch the fever.
And there's some truth to critical theory as well, by the way.
Right.
It's good to become aware of the ways in which society doesn't allocate resources in ways that it should, that there might be better alternatives, and to be aware of that and try and change society for the better. There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm not even ruling out critical theory entirely. What I'm saying is that teachers have this grand idea, and sometimes it can go awry. So, you talk about emancipation. Well, what emancipation from what? What are you emancipating a student from? Are you trying to get them to reject the whole value of the society, the whole values of the societies within which they exist? Well, if so, that's going to be maladaptive, right? That's not going to likely lead to positive outcomes in that student's life, because they're going to deny all the kind of cultural rules that they would need to abide by in order to succeed, or at least to make their chances of being successful within whatever society they inhabit high. So that, it can go awry, and teachers can think that their role is something other than that which they have been specifically employed to do. But again, even with critical theory, even when you've got like a fairly firm ideological background, and a whole series of texts from which to draw on, you still don't arrive at a conspiracy, because nobody can tell me what the emancipation looks like. Nobody can tell me the society, give me a specific example of the society they're trying to build, right? It's not the Bolshevik Party. The Bolsheviks got together as a conspiracy, killed a bunch of people, and actually created the Soviet Union, right? It existed. It was a thing. The conspiracy existed. There were people. They formed a political party. The political party had an agenda, and it formed a state. It happened. But I don't see that happening with teachers. Even if there is some kind of shared ideological background, it's almost like even with that, you're still herding cats.
So to your point about, the pedagogy of the oppressed, really, I went to the United Nations. I had seen some things online about this.
So
this program.
We heard that there was a conspiracy being pushed by the United Nations, or at least by some parts of the United Nations, in order to indoctrinate
a nonprofit
children.
Affiliate kind of
in order to indoctrinate children into being transgender.
Right.
Now,
and so
again, before we go any further,
yes,
there are individual educators who are doing that, particularly
I'm sure
with
there
autistic
are.
children.
Right.
We're not denying this.
We don't know any.
exists, that happens,
Right.
and that's bad.
Right.
We're not denying that it happens. We want to know, is there actually an international conspiracy with
Right.
enough members in order to implement this on a vast scale?
Right. We're not talking about not
Yes.
individual bad actors, that, because no matter what field you talk about, no matter what issue it is, you're going to find a few of those.
And we're not even necessarily saying that there isn't a significant number of them. I think there is quite a few, and I think that they're doing a lot of harm. And they might even be united by an ideology. In fact, they are united by a kind of ideological outlook, but it doesn't follow that there is an international conspiracy. And we heard the claim recently that there was firm evidence for this in the documentation officially and publicly shared by UNESCO. So we had a look.
Yes, so UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. That's so UNESCO is an acronym for United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And so its mission is to contribute to peace and security by promoting international cooperation in education, sciences, culture, communication, and information. It promotes knowledge sharing, the free flow of ideas to accelerate mutual understanding and a more perfect knowledge of each other's lives. So there is the particular one that we had gotten some inklings of, and I watched a few videos online, and I saw that people were posting things. Have you seen the curriculum for this? Because so it's called, and I think the title might be part of the problem. The title is Comprehensive Sexuality Education Course. So comprehensive sexuality education. I think that might be part of the issue. Maybe people don't go any further and they presume that sexuality education is like, I don't know, like what sex you want to be or are, or no. So what I did was I actually got online and I enrolled in their course. I enrolled in their course for teachers, and I did it yesterday. It is focused, again, sort of your pedagogy of the oppressed example kind of like, made me think of this. It's actually focused on, not on Western countries, but more on Eastern and South Africa, a region where there's a lot more, a higher HIV, higher ST and other STIs. So they're focusing on not on sexuality the way that maybe Americans or people in the UK think of the word sexuality. So there's 10 units. And I actually started with 10 and worked backwards because 10 was classroom delivery skills and resources. So I started there because I'm like, oh, if there's anything to find, it's going to be in there.
It's most likely going to be there, yeah.
Yeah. So I did do unit 10 first. And the worst thing that I found.
Worst in parentheses, by the way, right?
Yeah, I know. In air quotes. I'm using air quotes. Yes.
By worst, we mean what a real kind of traditional Christian conservative would. And again, I don't want to outgroup them either because I've got some very good friends.
It's not even that bad. It's I could.
No.
Like, this is like I'm seriously, I'm joking about the worst thing. So they grabbed. You know how sometimes when people are making a program, they'll grab an existing like YouTube video or something, and they'll link to it. Okay. So that's what they did. They linked to sort of a silly, honestly, sort of a three-ish minute video. And it's sort of like almost like a frivolous kind of, I don't know. Teachers do this a lot. They use those kind of like fun comic fonts, whenever they don't use a serious font. They use these like kind of fun fonts and stuff. It's kind of like it's one of those googly drawing things, anyway, and it's about 3 minutes, and it's about supposedly like a really dumbed down frivolous version of how people learn. Okay. So it says, oh, kids learn through experience, through reflection, and through application. So, I was like, okay, well, maybe, I'm like, oh, maybe this is the nefarious part, that like, kids would be, I don't know, acting things out or something, and so I go through the program, the rest of Unit 10, and what do they have? They have, this is mostly for, teens and stuff. They suggest possibilities like having an anonymous question box so that people who are afraid to ask questions about sex could put it in the box. They suggest maybe that some role play in that people might practice uh, talking about whether it's time to have sex, practice saying no, practice asking about birth control so that you would ask those questions in advance so they would maybe practice. So that's their role play. These are just suggestions though. This was not an actual curriculum. It was offering ideas, and then they were asking teachers, to like post questions or post their own materials if they wished. Now, I did not click on any of those because I was afraid I might get a virus. So I didn't click on anything.
And to be clear, these are being targeted at educators in developing countries with high rates of HIV and a
Yes.
lack of access to birth control and medicine and stuff
And
like
it was,
that.
yes.
Not Miami.
No.
It's definitely not Miami.
No, it is not. No. And so then there was a section also on. So I went from that. I found nothing nefarious in the teaching materials thing. Nothing at all. Oh, and by the way, this was their big advice. Because there were, it says about how to answer questions. They said answer questions honestly, even the awkward questions, while being mindful of the age of the child. Sometimes less is more. Stick to the facts. Don't insert values or personal information. So there is, it's really focused on, respect for others, how to be respected, how to engage in safe behavior. There's a lot of stuff about relationships, and in section 9, unit 9, there's stuff about relationships, and they talk about say a relationship is a ship, and how do you keep the ship afloat? If everybody doesn't work on the ship, then these are like pretty
Sounds like it's encouraging the opposite of promiscuity.
It definitely is. So then I get to gender, and I'm like, ooh, maybe there's something, must be something here on
drum roll.
Yes. And so because in the intro to the gender thing, they have some citations, and I'm like, okay, those are a little, like
Spicy?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking more that they're more contemporary gender citations. Okay. So, I was like, okay, maybe this is good. Maybe I'm going to find something here. You know what it was? It was all about how men also, I mean, there were women also, but it was really about how men can participate in protecting women from violence, can participate in keeping their uh, keeping their own tempers and their own in check. It really was about male violence against women, and again, this would be more targeted towards maybe particular areas of the world, but it seems to be driven by international world statistics on violence against women. So rape and assault, physical assault and sexual assault. So it was very tame. in that there were no details or anything, but they had they interviewed, say, like there was one man who was saying, I have a daughter now, and I want her to have a healthy relationship, healthy relationships with men, including me. I want her to know I respect her, and that kind of thing. So it was about that. It was about trying to bolster women within a relationship, to value, to be valued, to value themselves, and for men to value women. So there was nothing there either. I watched all the videos. I read the materials. There was some stuff about STIs and HIV specifically. There's a whole unit on that. There's a unit on fertility, pregnancy, and reproduction. It's all very, like, over and over again, age appropriate. I mean, they just are hammering, or down on you don't talk about these things willy-nilly.
So there's no twerking?
No, there's not. There's a unit on gender, and the unit on gender does include a glossary of terms. Okay. And that glossary of terms includes some, contemporary language, like transgender, and that kind of thing. There's no content in there about those things. There's just a glossary of terms that the teacher should know in case they get a question. There's nothing in there that says that any student should be taught. Again, this is the teacher training module. These are glossary terms that a teacher should know. Okay. So the teacher should be knowing these, contemporary terminology.
So a teacher should know what transgender means.
Right.
So they're able to field a question should a question arise, but it most certainly doesn't follow from that they're instructing teachers to educate specifically students in transgenderism, let alone try to convince students that they're transgender.
Correct. There's nothing about there yet.
By the way, I'm not trying to say that there aren't some teachers who don't do that.
Right. Or might even interpret these materials that way. It could happen.
That's bad. And that's bad if they do that. But it's not a reasonable reading of the literature that's what the United Nations is trying to push. So this idea that there's this kind of international conspiracy theory, well, if it exists, I don't think it's in this document, this teacher training course.
No. In fact, there's a list of concerns. So if you're concerned about this program, concern number 10 is that comprehensive sexuality education is a means of recruiting young people towards alternative lifestyles. Comprehensive sexuality education is not a means of recruiting young people towards alternative lifestyles, but rather a means of ensuring that all young people have access to accurate information and services in order to achieve the higher standard of health and well-being. Comprehensive sexuality education is grounded in human rights and acknowledges that people express themselves differently in all societies, sometimes not conforming to gender or social norms. It does not endorse or campaign for any particular lifestyle other than promoting health and well-being for all young people. It is focused on respect for others and how to be respected and engage in safe behavior.
So it's liberal, in other words.
Yeah, it is quite liberal, yes. I did find, I had to dig hard for this. I found in another article, okay, so somebody in a published article, in an appendix, yes, in an appendix in a Canadian journal article that was evaluating, I think it was in 2017, I think, they were evaluating a Canadian sex education program in Toronto or Ontario. And it buried in the Appendix A and Appendix B are what they claim. I could not find this on the UNESCO page, okay? But what they claimed was UNESCO guide suggestions, okay, for age appropriate sexuality education. Okay. So I'm actually I won't be able to see you because I'm going to actually read this on my screen. So if you want to
Okay.
I won't be able to see you. So, okay. So they do have a kindergarten through 6 page. Again, this is what a Canadian researcher who was looking into a sex education program claims was UNESCO. Okay. I could not find it on the UNESCO page. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. At kindergarten, that children, there's all kinds of qualifications here, but basically that children should learn parts of the body and learn how to express their needs and feelings. So this isn't just about sex, but express their needs and feelings, parts of the body, and welcoming a new baby, including possibly the steps to making a baby. So you might imagine that like a child who, well, you have the equivalent of a kindergartner. I mean, I know you don't have kindergarten, there, but I think you have a 5 or 6 year old, right?
Yeah, so I mean, they are taught what genitalia are, and
Right.
that the only person who should be touching their genitalia are parents when they're washing you, and that they need to know what genitalia are, just in case some strange adult is trying to touch your genitalia. They need to know that that's not okay.
Right. Right.
And I think that's entirely reasonable, and would
Right.
seem to be the kind of thing that they're alluding to here.
Yeah, and also the kind of thing kids start to get interested in, just in general, like
Yeah,
like maybe they have a sister and their sister is different than they are, and it's like, wait a minute,
what's going on
what?
here?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, then in the first grade, body, mind, and heart,
Kind of
as
questions,
it relates.
Mommy, why don't you have a willy?
Yeah.
That kind of question.
So it says aspects of sexuality in the first grade, but what it says in parentheses is body, heart, and mind. So that's not like sex, right? Then it says identity, gender stereotypes. Well, what it says is gender roles and stereotypes and respect for differences. I mean, I'm not seeing anything nefarious there. And then, like you said, how to recognize a situation that might be, sexual assault. So how to report to a parent or something like that. So we're going through this thing. It's like, okay, maybe in second, it says, second grade, expressing your feelings, maybe that there are sexual organs, appreciating your body, and personal hygiene. Okay. Third grade, again, body, heart, and mind, messages conveyed by the social environment. So they're expanding it a little bit. Stereotypes, the influence of stereotypes, how to recognize different forms of sexual assault. I mean, I'm just not seeing anything here. This would be the grade school part that maybe people would be the most concerned about. As we get to the 4th and 5th grade, aspects maybe of puberty, feelings about growing up, establishing egalitarian relationships. Let's see, representations of love and friendship. Then when you get to the high school, again, I mean, this is an appendix that they claim is UNESCO driven. I could not verify that. Now we get to, like the high school, entering adolescence,
By which
advantages of
time
having,
plenty of young people are having sex around that age. I mean, I
yeah,
know I was in like
yeah,
16 or something like that. So.
yeah, advantages of having a positive body image, influences that social norms can have on body image,
Oh, that
romantic
might be nefarious.
relationships.
That could be
Okay,
nefarious,
okay.
right? Because that could be justifying obesity and stuff like that. You could argue it's not
Oh,
nefarious in the
okay.
way that they're presenting
Right,
it, right? It's not like indoctrination into making people trans or gay or anything like that. But you could say that it's nefarious because I don't know, if somebody's really fat, that does have health risks, right? So you shouldn't be
sure.
body positive about being really fat. You could be positive
Uh,
about yourself,
right, right.
but you shouldn't be positive about
Um,
that aspect of yourself.
and my suspicion is that some of that came about more in response to anorexia and stuff, so like,
Probably.
the
Yeah,
boomerang
probably.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Probably.
So here's like, you know, sexually transmitted diseases, how prevention and protection measures work, developing safe sexual behaviors. But this is like, now we're into like, 17-year-olds starting to talk about issues related to sexual relations in adolescence. So and they're talking about like emotional intimacy versus sexual intimacy, development of safe sexual behaviors, pregnancy, what to do. So
By the way,
again,
all of
yeah,
all of the teenage boys are watching porn at this point.
I know. I know, because
So,
now you can get it online. You don't even have to, you
don't
don't even
even
have to
have to
put it under
walk
your
into a funny
mattress where your
store.
mom might find it, right?
Yeah. So in other words, this is, in comparison to what they're finding online, this is very, very milk toast. So if there are
Right.
if you're worried about sexual indoctrination at this age, like the 15, 16, 17, 18 age, then if they were to get it from this, they're getting far worse on their phones and far
Right.
worse on the internet, like literally at the touch of a button.
Yeah.
So there doesn't seem to be any basis whatsoever to be concerned about this very milquetoast stuff. And again, doesn't follow that we're not saying that there are bad teachers that you shouldn't be concerned of, or that those bad teachers are trying to justify their behavior by reference to this stuff. It just seems that there isn't a charitable reading of this stuff that would lead you to believe that this literature is causing this kind of bad teachers to behave in these bad ways, let alone that there is an international conspiracy aimed at converting children to being gay or transgender.
Right. Through this,
It's not here.
curriculum or through this program or anything. I know you looked at it also, since
Yeah,
we
I mean,
talked last.
I couldn't find anything at all. I mean, I didn't look at things in the depth that you did, having,
Yeah.
two children
Well, I
and
just
and
signed up
stuff.
for the course and poked her.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, there's a class. Okay, I'll just see what's in here. So I could find no evidence. People were writing, in like in response to, like, for example, there was there's some YouTube videos out there, like talking about the UNESCO program and that kind of stuff. And people were writing on the comments and stuff like, exactly what we had heard, which is that this is, a nefarious plot and everything. And so yeah, there's, I just, I
What
mean,
what seems to be happening? This is just my opinion because it's not something we can ever get data on. What seems to be happening is that the anti-woke movement was spearheaded by liberals, like us, and conservatives, because it began within the left. It began left on left, right?
right,
And then those liberals then allied with Christian conservatives, and became a kind of coherent, semi-coherent kind of movement. And they seem to have inherited conservative Christian skepticism to sex education, full stop. Right? The kind of stuff that you got, do you remember in the 1980s and the 1990s? Where they would
yeah,
say
I
that
mean,
sex education shouldn't happen at all at school, that's for the parents and that kind of thing. I think that's what's been inherited into the anti-woke movement, possibly. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. And so then what, then when we get into, to sort of circle back around to, some of the other things we've talked about on the podcast, then you get to a situation where every parent needs to approve of every book that's in any of their kids' school classrooms or libraries or whatever. And if it's like, each parent would get to, how many books would be left? You know, I just don't know, if kids are going to get access to any books. And I mean, I guess I can see why people are homeschooling, from both perspectives. It's, if you want your kid to be exposed to a broad range of things, maybe you would engage in homeschooling because you feel like some places specifically, maybe people are not getting exposed to some things that you think they should be, or maybe being, school is being maybe a little too much focused on some other thing. but also, they're homeschooling because they're, over sheltering, right? Afraid that their kid might get exposed to something that they don't think they should be.
So did you find any connection at all? I didn't. With Drag Queen Story Hour? Was there
No,
any mention of
no,
Drag
that's a
Queen
good point.
Story Hour? Was it even in the
Nowhere.
glossary? Was it in the
No,
glossary? It
no,
wasn't
it
even
was
in the
not in the
glossary.
glossary. No, I should have printed out the glossary. I have an account now, so I can go back in. But yeah, the
And,
glossary was very.
and again, to be clear, I have seen the videos, you don't need to show them to me, of terrible people doing completely inappropriate things around children during Drag Queen Story Hour, and I 100% agree with you that those people should be arrested and never allowed
Right.
around children ever again. We're of exactly the same mind on that. If you're a conservative and you're absolutely appalled by that, I am appalled by that, and I'm not denying that it happens. Absolutely not. I've seen the videos, it's real, it happens. The point I'm making is that you look again, the Chinese people, the Communist Party are doing lots of horrible things, but you cannot extrapolate from the actions of the Communist Party somehow that all or most Chinese people are allied to the same agenda, right? It's not fair.
Yeah, and I really think that
And
we
the
can
same
do the
thing to Drag
most.
Queen. Yes,
Right.
go ahead.
And with racism, I mean, I think we can do the
Yeah.
most good. I mean, I just really think we can do the most good by actually addressing the few bad actors than in trying to elevate. I mean, I kind of think that we're elevating things like, oh, it's a conspiracy. It's like, it's this grand, there's a grand poobah of Drag Queen Story Hour,
So
and I don't think that's helpful or
isn't it
useful.
isn't it interesting? So on the one hand, if you're somebody who is against kind of wokeism, you'll make the reasonable criticism of critical social justice, and I would agree with you, that one of the key issues with it is that it collectivizes guilt.
Mm-hmm.
You would say, like, well, of course racism has been done by white people and that racism is terrible, but as a white person, I don't agree with that. I've never been party of that, therefore I should not be punished for it. And I agree with you, right? You're against collectivization. But if you're against collectivization and you care about being consistent, with how you think, you can't on the one hand make that argument, and then on the other make the argument that just because there's some awful person involved in Drag Queen Story Hour, that therefore most or all people who are doing Drag Queen Story Hour are performing in the same way. It doesn't work. Maybe it could work if there was some kind of coordinated international conspiracy. Now, it's very hard to coordinate an international conspiracy because, again, it's herding cats. But look, we've looked into it. And we were told, we have heard that this documentation, this UNESCO documentation, was evidence of it, that it was quite... And it's not only is it not there, the documentation seems to be fairly vociferously against
Yes.
indoctrinating anybody into any lifestyle. And the only mentions of transgenderism or homosexuality, I think, were in glossaries.
They were in a glossary, yes, for teachers, not yes, for teachers to understand. I was thinking when I was going through this, when I was so two little stories from when I was a kid. So I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, so very Midwestern in the Rust Belt, and next door to us lived Roger and Steve. And I loved Roger and Steve were so nice to me. And they had a black cat named Trick. And I thought that was just the coolest. I loved that they had a cat. We didn't have a pet or anything. And so I asked my parents one day, like, do you think Roger or Steve will ever get married? And my dad just said to me, without even missing a beat, he said, Roger and Steve love each other just like your mom and I do. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, it's like,
Same.
totally,
we had a gay couple living next to us as well, and
totally enough
fine.
Information. Totally enough information. That was all the information that I wanted or needed. So there's a point at which it's like you just don't you don't need to say more. If the kid asks more, maybe, but I didn't know anything about sex anyway. So it was just like, I wasn't asking about their sexual orientation. My dad just said they love each other the same way that your mom and I do. And that was perfect for mom. That was age appropriate, honest responding. That was not trying to indoctrinate me into
No.
something.
I mean, like next door to me, there was a couple. It was Eddie. One of them was called Eddie. I think the other one was called Steve. I'm not sure about Steve, but it was definitely one of them was called Eddie. And I absolutely loved them too. They were both really
Yes.
friendly, really nice. And I don't even think I asked my parents. I don't even think it occurred to me that you know, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know what made me ask. I have no memory of the circumstances of why I asked that question, but I just remember that was the explanation. So I have another example. I was at so I was just, reading pretty good at this point. I was an early reader, so I was probably still pretty young. We were at a bookstore, and The Happy Hooker was a book that was on the shelf. Okay.
Whoa.
And that I don't know you can probably look up the author real quick. It was kind of a famous book. So,
Not for kids though, right?
Oh, no. But I was at a bookstore with my parents. So I'm at maybe a mall kind of bookstore, one of those. And so I'm reading, I'm a pretty good reader at this point. And I look up at my dad and I say loudly enough for the whole damn store to hear, I think, "Daddy, what's a hooker?" Okay. And he, without missing a beat, he just looked at me and he said, "That's someone who pretends to love you for money." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I mean, that was good. Again, there was no sex in that explanation. There was nothing, right? That was an age appropriate response. And so I think, and that's what's in this UNESCO thing is over and over again. They're like, you be honest and you only answer the question that they ask. You don't give more. You don't talk about your it specifically says, do not interject your personal beliefs or your opinions. You answer honestly. So, did you find the book?
Yes. The Happy Hooker. Apparently there's a film.
It's also a film.
Story of a Dutch prostitute.
Okay.
And I think she was the owner of a brothel as well.
Okay.
She's still around. She's 80 years old.
Oh, wow.
Quite a glamorous looking lady, actually. There's a picture
So
of
maybe
her.
was the book actually written after the movie? Maybe, you know how sometimes they do that.
No,
So.
Xaviera Hollander, born 15th of June 1943, is a Dutch former call girl, madam, and author. She is best known for her best-selling memoir, The Happy Hooker,
Okay.
My Own Story.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think she owned a brothel and stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not on the UNESCO site.
No, it is not.
It's not required reading.
Yeah. Nowhere, anywhere would you come to think that. So, so I mean, I think that, you know what, I don't think everybody can go, investigate these things to the extent that, you and I did. I mean, I didn't go through 14 hours of training. I skipped, I went to every single page, but I didn't answer the questions and I didn't, do all that kind of stuff. But it still took, 3 or 4 or 5 hours of my time. And, you can't necessarily expect everybody, to do that when they hear these things. But I do think that healthy skepticism is recommended when you hear about, conspiracy theories, because I think your herding cats example is just, or, analogy is just perfect, because honestly, few of us are that organized at that many levels. I mean, look at what happened with Black Lives Matter, right? It just, I mean, the organization itself. That doesn't mean that every person who was involved in Black Lives Matter doesn't believe or are bad people or had nefarious intent, right? But there's definitely some bad actors, and unfortunately, the organization has suffered because of it, and bad actors in lots of different ways. lots of different ways, not just in one way, but you
But
know,
also, bad actors like seldom have each other's interests at heart, right?
exactly.
um, one bad actor is not likely to intervene on behalf of another bad actor,
Right.
unless they can see a very specific reason that it's going to be in their favor.
It's like a whole bunch of gangsters, like,
Well,
coming
right.
together and,
Well, yeah, exactly. It doesn't happen. That's why you get complete
right,
gang wars happening all of the time.
right.
Certainly, they tried to do that with the Commission. And do you know about the Commission? It was like the 5 Italian American gangster families of New
Right.
York tried to form a kind of an alliance, and that broke apart and ended up in war. But yeah, I mean, in order to, and again, we're not saying that conspiracies don't happen. But if you're going to try and pull off a conspiracy, you are going to need really a very small group of people who are aware of what the aims are and how they're going to be implemented. Because otherwise, again, it becomes herding cats. It basically becomes pretty much impossible, especially with Westerners, by the way.
More individualistic.
Again, when I'm not talking about all Westerners are individualistic, but there is evidence from cross-cultural psychology that they tend to be more independent. We tend to participate in, for example, whistleblowing behavior happens far more in America than it would do in a country like Japan, for cultural reasons. There doesn't seem to be any evidence of an international conspiracy to turn kids gay, to convert
from this organization.
And this we were told that there was easy evidence here. We haven't found it. There doesn't seem to be a conspiracy to turn kids gay or trans. And even if there was, by the way, I don't know, if somebody was to tell me that being here's like one I heard in Japan, right? We shouldn't allow same-sex marriage because same-sex marriage will turn men gay. That's actually that's actually an argument that was made by a senior Japanese politician.
Okay.
Now, I can't speak on behalf of that senior Japanese politician, but when same-sex marriage was legalized in the UK, all I can say is that it didn't make me look at my friends in new and interesting ways. Sorry.
Yeah.
Good. So yes, no evidence for a conspiracy. And be careful with this othering. So again, we don't want to other the people who are doing the othering either.
I know.
We know that we do this too, right? It's a quirk, and it's an error of categorization. It's fast thinking. It's necessary some of the time because you just don't have the cognitive resources to go through and categorize things rigorously or do what we've done. It could also be emotionally traumatic because you're starting to reveal problems with your own thinking, and that's can lead you to, I don't know, reject some beliefs that might be an important part of your identity. We're just saying, look, if you are listening to this podcast or watching us on YouTube, then in all likelihood, you're somebody who is against critical social justice because you've been the victim of collectivization, or you feel threatened by collectivization because they've told you something like you're inherently racist because you're a white person and that's socially conditioned into you, blah 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 blah. We agree they shouldn't be doing that, but again, don't make the same mistake that they do.
Let's
as
not
Nietzsche,
become what we hate.
Exactly, as Nietzsche famously observed, he who fights monsters, be careful lest he become one himself. Insert whatever pronouns you like. And on that note, thank you very much. If you think that there is a conspiracy, again, we're not saying that there aren't individual people who are doing this and that they don't have some bizarre ideology. They, I agree they exist. We're just saying that there doesn't seem to be evidence of a conspiracy at the national or international level to push this. Certainly not within the United Nations. You can find evidence of these people on TikTok, but you can't conclude because one person on TikTok is doing something utterly reprehensible, and we agree they are, that therefore there is some huge conspiracy.
Yes.
You can only conclude that there are some people on TikTok doing some reprehensible things. That's reasonable. Don't take the next leap. If you think that there is evidence of a massive international conspiracy, please leave it in the comments. And we will look into it. And if you can prove that there is some conspiracy, we'll happily apologize to you.
Yeah.
But I think would be surprised.
We would be surprised, but we're open.
Very much.
Yes.
And by the way, last thing, just because you've been fooled by this idea that there is an international conspiracy does not mean that you're stupid.
No.
It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. We all do this. I have done it. For example, I'm racist against white people, I discovered recently, because I assume that they're all woke. Yeah, because I assume that I just assume that they're going to be woke, and so I just avoid them like the plague. Another one, here's another one that's really important. Just because somebody is coming out with loads of critical social justice talking points and believes in that ideology, it doesn't follow that they are going to participate in cancelling you. Right. So in the case where, with me, when people went after me on the basis of basically a critical social justice witch hunt and lying about stuff that I didn't say and all kinds of nonsense, some of the people that were first to come and were very vociferous in my defense were people who would come out with a lot of critical social justice talking points, and I would pretty much describe as woke, to be honest. Something similar happened to you, right? You had somebody who's
yeah, and I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I haven't been particularly open to hearing from much of anybody, so nobody's apologized, so I'm not as open as you are.
To be fair, I think you've also suffered more than I have, right? And look, you don't have to be open to these people either, by the way. But I think there's one, not being open to them or being hesitant to social. I'm hesitant in socializing with these people as well. But it doesn't follow from you being hesitant and being cautious that you think that these people are evil or should be punished, right? No. So just don't become the kind of monster that, that they are. And again, I'm not saying that if you believe that there is some international conspiracy that is turning kids gay or trans, that you are transphobic or that you're homophobic. I don't think that. I certainly don't think that you're a bad person. I don't think you're stupid. I just think you're wrong on this one point. But we're all wrong on some things. That's it. I certainly don't think that you should be punished or cancelled. Or absolutely not. Because I'm going to be wrong on a lot of things too, by the way. And I've kind of given you some examples. Good. And on that note, thank you very much for listening. This has been an interesting one. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.